Good evening. You are listening to Radio Free Magonia, the official podcast of the Magonian Research Society. I am your host, Michael Parrish, and this episode is very important for us for two reasons. The first, my partner, Tom,
Hello.
has finally been able to join us. This is his on-air debut. How are you, Tom?
Yes, I'm all good. I'm very glad to finally be here after having wrangled the time zones to get myself on air. But yes, hello.
Yeah, and second, this is our first episode where we interview an experiencer about their experiences, as opposed to the first two episodes where we interviewed writers and researchers. So with that out of the way, let's get to this. Our guests tonight are Todd and Amy. Todd and Amy, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having us on.
Thank you. Hi.
Thank you for appearing. Now, it's my understanding that most of what we're discussing tonight are going to be Amy's experiences.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with her, and let's just start where it starts. What's the first thing you can tell us?
Okay. Well, let's see. As a child, I must have been probably about 4 or 5 and probably on up to age 9 that this would happen to me. But I had many what I would call, or what I thought was, bad dreams about being abducted by aliens. Constantly, I can remember being frightened of bright lights and very scared of being touched and on my legs, especially because I had great and terrific pain in my legs constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And as a child, it would get so bad that my parents actually took me to a doctor, like an orthopedic surgeon, and they diagnosed me with some kind of rare thing called Osgood-Schlatter's disease,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the bones grow too fast for the muscles, and that was the reason for it. Well, they did some X-rays and different things like that, and they found that during a lot of that time that I have something in my leg. It's in my right leg.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually a piece of metal. They cannot tell me what it is. It's actually in the shin bone. So, like, I've never been operated on. I've never had anything put in there, nothing. But it's been with me. It still is there, and I've never had it go away. But to tell you about some of the dreams that I had as a child,
Okay.
that were so frightening for me were, like, for an example, was like this. In our house, my dad built our house, and it was kind of a very kind of up further along in the design than way back when in the 50s. It was really modern, is what I want to say.
Okay.
And the whole back of our house was a very thick paned glass. And it was 2 stories tall, and there was no wall. It was just glass. So if you walked to the edge of my bedroom, you could look down and see woods, okay? Or if you looked up, it was you in my whole view of my bedroom on the one wall would be all glass, all right? So, and that was always open. We never had curtains or anything like that. There were floodlights that came on, and you could see into the woods for miles, basically. It was very neat looking. However, as a child, that had to have been the most frightening thing, going to bed at night and seeing those floodlights come on, and you'd be laying there and, you'd imagine all kinds of things, looking in at you and so forth. One of the things I remember constantly is the trees moving, like as if a helicopter was up there, and lights coming down into my room so that I couldn't see. And the next thing I remember is that I'd be crying and screaming for my mother, and this woman who looked like my mother would be there with me. But when she'd turn around or she'd do something, to do, like Stepford Wives is what it felt like, because she'd turn around and she'd lift up her hair a little bit, and there'd be like this strange flap of skin that would move over, and you could see all the electronics on it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it was like, what the heck? And I'm having these dreams at 4 and 5 years old, and I was never allowed to watch any kind of shows like this. I mean, I lived a very strict life with my parents being in a very strange cult, pretty much Christian cult. that we can touch on that another time.
Mm-hmm.
But so like I never was raised with anything like that. So for me to even think about stuff like that was very, very odd, very
It
scary.
couldn't have been pop culture contamination.
No, not at all, because
Let,
we
let
just
me
didn't
let
do
me
that.
let me ask you this.
Sure.
What years were these experiences occurring?
Okay, this would have been, I was born in 1965, so probably around 1970, around there, 71, 72.
That's
on up.
that's interesting because this was before alien abductions became a meme,
Yeah.
before they became a cultural trope. Like you'd had the Betty and Barney Hill case, you'd had the Villas Boas case in Brazil, which I don't think was widely known in the English-speaking world at the time. And so, and yet this was years before Strieber, years before the big three came out in the 80s and 90s. Hopkins, Mack, Jacobs. So this is interesting. Did you ever see any kind of for lack of a better term, extraterrestrial entity during this time period?
Put it this way, I've never seen them, but I remember thinking that large, thin shadows were in there.
Okay.
Large, thin shadows, but it was always a shadow. It was never an on-site seeing it.
Okay.
And I can remember laying on a very, very cold slab or table, and the room that I was in was also metal, but it had strange writing. Like I didn't recognize it at all. I would have thought it was like maybe Russian or something like that is what
Okay.
it looked like to me. But I don't remember anything other than that except for the bright lights and and the pains in my legs. The pains in my legs, and this woman who looked like my mother, but I knew was not my mother, would tell me to calm down and you're okay, that kind of a thing. And she was in a lot of my dreams, which was very frightening because I'd actually wake up and go check my real mom and see like, let me look at your neck. She'd be like, "What's wrong with you?" So kind of strange.
Now here we have a strange figure masquerading as someone known to the recipient.
Yes.
I have heard of that before. I do believe Carla Turner in her books from the early 90s described a similar experience, but it was
Really
attempting to pass itself off as her husband. Tom might know better than I would because it's been years since I read this. Tom?
It honestly reminds me of a case which wasn't an alien abduction, quote unquote, but rather a one of these kind of nearly missing people cases from Mount Shasta, which took place in 2010, and basically a 3-year-old child was camping with their family on the banks of a large creek, and disappeared at approximately 6 p.m. and then about 5 hours later, he was found lying in a thicket directly next to the trail, which searchers had already been using, and which is a classic kind of motif in these sorts of cases. But the story which he had to tell was that he was taken up into a cave by somebody who looked a lot like his grandmother, and that when this grandmother took him up into this cave, the quote light made her look like a robot.
Oh, how weird.
And and funnily enough, that same grandmother had been staying in that forest area earlier that year, I believe, and she'd had a very weird experience in which she ended up with like a prick on the back of her neck.
Mm-hmm.
And so she believed, and she told the researcher David Paulides that she believed that something had effectively taken a genetic sample from her to masquerade as her. Obviously, I think that we take like a less materialistic view to these sorts of things in general, but I think that the description of the grandmother's experience is still very interesting in correlation with what her grandson reported.
Yeah.
And so this figure, we're left to wonder, this figure appearing in your dreams, was it actually a robot with your mother's skin stretched over it, or was that just costuming? Was that just
Yeah.
like a construct that whatever this intelligence was created for a specific effect? Hey, let's look like RoboMom.
Yes,
Whatever.
I believe. I don't believe it was probably actually a real robot. I believe that it
Yeah.
may have been something that they made someone look like. It's one of them, perhaps. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And whether they needed to do it with a robot figure, I don't know why the mechanics would be involved in it, but in all my dreams it was always like that. She always had like a Stepford kind of, like very it wasn't real, it was very robotic the way she would say things to me. You know what I mean? So I knew it wasn't my mother, but she sure looked like her. That's the scary thing. So to me, finding that piece of flap of skin that moved back and there was like robot type controls and stuff there, it was like, oh man, that's really scary.
Yeah.
But like this is in 1970s, like around there, I probably was about 5 or 6 having these dreams constantly, what I thought was dreams at that time. But reading a lot more stuff later on, I never looked at any of that stuff for years until actually I met Todd, and we'd talk about stuff like this and I'd be like, wow, this is really strange. Now we're learning that this may really have been an abduction, or it may be something else, who knows.
But it's interesting that your experiences predate both the Stepford Wives and Terminator.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
May I ask you where this occurred geographically? Because sometimes that's relevant.
I grew up in Butler County and up near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And that's where it would have taken place. I lived on a farm up there, so. Okay.
Now, Todd tells me you live in the Chestnut Ridge region, which is known to be a hot spot. I've never been there, but that's what's claimed. Was this in that same region?
We're probably that would have been like maybe 2 or 3 counties over. Okay. So I would say, yes, there's a lot of activity in this area of Pennsylvania, definitely.
Okay. So let's just go on with your experiences. What happened next?
Let's see. From what I can remember, let's see. Let me think. Not so much. Those went on till I was probably about 8 or 9, and then eventually my legs stopped hurting. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get. I'd actually have a lot of bruises on my leg, and I'd have actual. I still have a scar. It's like an indentation there in my leg, in my shin, where they told me that piece of metal is. Yeah. It's probably no bigger than the size of maybe 2 rice, maybe 2 grains of rice, basically. Right. And I've moved so many times and stuff, but I used to have a picture of it, and we'd always, my mother, and they were always like, like, where did this come from? What is this? No one ever knew. We had no idea. And the doctor actually wanted to do a sampling of it, but my parents wouldn't let them. Mm-hmm. So I still have it, and here I am, well into my 50s now. So how frightening. But on that end, that was mostly my life as a child, growing up with that type of thing. Another interesting thing about myself is I am an Rh negative mother, and I have the strange blood of the AB negative.
Yes.
And I've often wondered sometimes if some of my experience don't have a lot to do with that, believe it or not. I don't know how much of it I actually believe, but it sure is interesting to talk about and find out the things that other people have experienced with the same type of blood type.
Yes.
And a lot of what I've read is like the aliens are attracted to that type of thing. I don't know. So maybe it could be. I also have a lot of experience with speaking with the dead. Also being able tell fortunes of people. I've done that my entire life. Mm-hmm. I've been able to not so much read your palm, but when I touch your palm, I get a glimpse of a picture of something. And then it kind of tells me what's going to happen to that person. I've always been able to do that. There are certain people I will not read, especially my family, because I don't want to know what happens to them. But I've been able to tell people on a level of, let's say, for an example, it sounds like silly stuff, but like I've been able to tell people like, oh, you know what? You're single now, but you're gonna meet someone. His name's gonna be this name, and you're going to have 2 girls, and you're gonna live happily ever after in this area. And they'll look at me like I'm totally nuts. And 4 years later, my daughter's friend is now on her second child, which I told her she'd have 2 girls, and she married a man named Josh. And it happened. You know what I mean? So like, what happens with that, I don't know, but I've always been able to do that. I've done it with a few of my bosses. He asked me to read his palm, and when I got a glimpse of him passing away, and he was only in his 40s at that time, and I didn't want to tell him because I was really afraid. Like, I'm afraid of self-fulfillment if you tell people something bad. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I don't do it, so to speak. I just said, just be very careful and take care of yourself, that kind of a thing, and wouldn't really lead into anything that I saw. And sure enough, about 10 years later, he passed away with cancer.
Ooh.
So at a young age, which was pretty scary too. So various things like that. And you can even verify with my husband, Todd, that he's watched these things happen. Have you not?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah, it's been interesting that I'm able to do that. Also, the other thing too is ghost experiences.
Yes.
When Todd and I first, go ahead.
Before you go any further,
Sure.
I'd like to I'd like for you to lay them all out in just like a linear way.
Okay.
What was the first thing that happened, after the alien experiences ceased?
Oh, you mean like as far as other things that growing up as a teenager realizing that I could do, or that I've experienced that way?
Both, with an emphasis on individual experiences, memories.
Yeah. Let me think. Trying to think. In my teenage years, nothing really happened like that again. I hadn't had anything happen until I had gotten married to my first husband, and I had a child. And at that point is when things started to happen again.
Okay.
And for me, one of the things that happened, and I'll tell this story because it's one of my more prominent ones that I can never forget. And people will look at me like I have, 3 heads when I say this story because it sounds so far-fetched. But I truly believe I saw something that night that was from a different dimension or something. It was very frightening and very scary. I was not the only one that saw it.
Okay.
What happened was my girlfriend and I, and let's see, her name at that time was Sharon, and Sharon and I decided that we were going to go and see her husband's band. And they were playing that night, and we hired a babysitter to watch her children and my little girl. At that time, she was probably only about 4. And so we dropped them off at the babysitter, and we went and had a good time. And we weren't drinking. We decided we weren't going to drink because neither one of us wanted to be the one to have to drive home, without any fun. So we decided we both wouldn't drink. So on our way home, it was probably 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And we're probably both about 25, 26 years old at this time. And Sharon and I had been friends all through high school, so it's nothing new. And we were driving down the road, and I was driving actually, and I had a Plymouth Grand Fury, a big old car. That's all I remember. And I remember the headlights caught something off to the side. And I said to her, "My goodness, was that a bear?" So I literally backed up and pulled into this area because it looked like it was digging through a garbage container. And I went really close to it, probably not even 10 feet from it. And it looked like a bear from the back. And it was huge. I mean, bigger than any bear that you could ever see around here. We're talking, we have black bears out here. This looked like it could have been a grizzly bear. So we were like, oh my God. Well, when it turned around, it was not any type of bear at all. It was, it had a human face. That's all I can say. Had a human face covered in hair with these huge horns that went probably 2 or 3 feet in the air,
Mhm.
and they were really big. And when it smiled at us, which it did, it had human teeth. And we both looked at each other and gasped and said, "What the, is that?" And I remember we were both like raised very religiously, and the first thing she said is, "Oh my God, I'm going to hell. It's a demon." We thought it was a demon. It looked like a demon. And I have a picture of it that I drew a long time ago, and that I drew again, and I can send that to you so you can see what I'm talking about, because I draw this picture a lot.
It sounds to me like something out of Where the Wild Things Are, and I don't mean that jokingly.
No, that and the combination of, do you remember the three-headed dog called Zoso on Ghostbusters?
Yes.
Okay, that's what it kind of reminded me of, like the body of that dog with the 3 heads, only with this very strange, like human head, but fur all over it, and it stunk really bad. That's all I can say is it stunk really bad. So my thought was, what is this? And we both pulled out, and we were like crying the whole way back to the babysitter, and really upset because I had seen nothing like this in my life. I thought it was going to turn around and be a bear, and it wasn't. So and you can even ask Todd, whenever he came out to see me and we got together, the first thing he wanted to do was go and talk to that person that we had done this with to make sure that my story was actually true.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
Yeah, she confirmed the story. I talked to Sharon, and she was just as weirded out by when it happened.
Yep.
And she was convinced it was a demon.
Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing that happened to me then after that, as I saw that thing. And I read everything you could possibly read on the creatures from a different dimension, and how I could describe this thing, because it didn't look like anything else I'd ever seen in my life.
Now, let me ask you this. You say it smelled really bad.
Yes.
But what did it smell like?
Like it had gone through the garbage, plus like a very bad BO kind of thing.
Sulfur is commonly reported.
Yes, like a very bad BO kind of flavor. It's not a flavor, but a smell. It was terrible. Because I rolled down the window at that point to look out, thinking, am I seeing things, And it was very frightening. And we were very close, like I said. We had headlights right on it. So when it smiled is when we both screamed as loud as we could. And I backed out of there faster than, I could ever drive a car backwards, that's for sure.
Tom, does this remind you of anything? Are you seeing any parallels here?
Well, obviously, with the description of like a garbage smell, the main thing I'm thinking of is Sasquatch, of course.
Yeah.
With with reports of Sasquatch having that smell. I believe that other kind of hairy humanoid type entities have that same smell about them as well, like the kind of goat man creature, which is popular in all kinds of urban legends, though seems to have been encountered by some genuine witnesses.
I was going to say, I wonder if the horns, because I would have thought Sasquatch too at first, except for it had horns. So when you said the goat man, I've never heard of that. Could you explain a little bit?
The goat man, it's a legendary creature. It's found all around the states, but it's normally described as looking like an ancient Greek satyr or satyr. So like the god Pan.
Yes.
So
did you see its feet? Clearly.
Enough to see that it had big claws.
Okay, but not hooves.
Not hooves, claws.
Okay. What about its tail?
Didn't see that. It was sitting down, like in a sitting down position. It never stood. It kind of looked like you would like see a dog sit.
Okay.
Like that, but really big. Really big. I'd say probably maybe 10 foot across. It had to have been at least that big. Like the size of a grizzly bear. You would think that big or bigger.
Now, it's worth noting that this occurred during a transitional time in your life.
Mm.
You just married and you just had a daughter, is my understanding?
Yep.
Okay, there's liminality there.
Meaning,
we don't know why. We really have no idea why, but for some reason, there seems to be a correlation between strange experiences and liminal or transitional things, be they times in your life, times of the year, times of day, liminal locations like bridges or intersections, things like that.
Bridges are actually a big thing with goatmen specifically.
Yes.
It's funny you
So-
should say that, because we had just came across there was a, it was basically like a covered bridge that's near there. And we went through that first, and then that's when we saw that shortly thereafter.
Huh.
I was just thinking, when you said that, it reminded me, like, dang, that's we're known for the covered bridges out here too. And that was near there. Very
That's
strange.
noteworthy. So, what's the next experience?
Oh, let's see. Well, then after that, let's see. Nothing so much happened during the course of my marriage with my ex at that time.
Mhm.
Things really didn't get very strong with me until I met Todd. And that
Okay.
was in 2000. So I would say nothing pretty much happened during that period, but after that point, then I was really able to talk to the dead. I've done that. I have. I have been able to hear them in my head and give messages to people too. That not so much, but more recently, and I'll explain that one too.
Mhm.
But as far as the next thing I would say that would happen to me is the seeing of ghosts and
Okay.
things like that. I'll give you an example. We moved into an apartment, and it was on the second floor, and it was right in front of a town funeral home that everybody in this small town uses.
Mhm.
And we used to joke about it being a vortex, because such strange things would happen in that apartment that you would not. People, I tell you, people would look at us like we're crazy. But my 9-year-old daughter at that time could tell you the stories too, because it happened to her,
Mhm.
And it was just very, very strange for us. And I hadn't experienced much of that stuff at all until that apartment. And some of the things that would go on was, we'd be sitting in the living room, me and my daughter, watching TV, and my husband Todd would be sitting in the kitchen or in the bedroom,
Mhm.
and so we'd be watching TV and stuff, and we had this, like, those dividers. You ever see the dividers that are like 3 or 4 panels, and you just put them in a room to separate off like part of it, that type of thing? I had one of those. My daughter was sitting on the couch, and it would literally fold up and fall on her head. And it happened like 2 or 3 times, and I kept saying, "Oh my gosh!" And she starts crying, and everywhere she'd move, this thing would fold up and fall. And so finally, I said, "Marissa, just move from where you're at," And she didn't want to. So I finally just asked whatever spirit it was or whatever was happening, "Please, will you leave her alone? She's a little girl." And it didn't happen again. That was the first thing in that apartment that freaked me out, because I thought, what is this? It kept doing it. It would actually, you'd watch it and you could literally see it fold up, and it would fall on her, and hard too. It wasn't light. So that's why I basically just cried out and said, "Please stop."
And this was after Todd entered the picture.
Yeah. Yes.
So
yes.
again, another
Another big
liminal
thing.
time,
Yes.
another transitional time.
Yes. Yes, it was actually, because then after that is when things really started going crazy. And there'd be times in the apartment that my daughter would never sleep upstairs. She was deathly scared of her room, and it was in an attic. And I know that we would clean her entire room, go away for an evening, come back, and the room would be a mess again. And I'd say to her, "Did you do this?" And she'd swear up and down she didn't do it. Am I right?
Mhm.
And we'd say, "You had to have, because no one else was here." And she said, "Mommy, I didn't do it." But the whole room would be thrown with toys as if she had been in there, like we never did anything. Weird things like that would happen there constantly.
Poltergeist type.
Yeah, classic poltergeist.
Yeah.
And what else? What are these other things that would happen?
Well, one thing,
There you
if
go.
you don't mind me,
Go ahead.
is
I'll let him talk for a little bit.
we'd be sleeping at night, and we would wake up to something kicking our bed.
Yeah.
And there was no explanation as to, there was nothing around it that would be making our bed vibrate. And there would literally be something kicking it, and or making it vibrate in that sense.
And you could actually see the bed moving. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
At the bottom of the bed.
Again, that sounds very typical poltergeist to me. So just continue. What else happened?
Well, there was a time where I was away for the weekend, and I was on business with my boss, and her and I had to go to Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, and at this time we decided to stay at this place called the Victorian Inn is what it was. And we thought, oh, this sounds like a really nice little place to stay. Let's do that, and we can go to the conference and be in this bed and breakfast type place. So we went there, and we first go in. You had to choose your rooms. There was only like 4 or 5 rooms to choose from. So I picked this really big, lavish, beautiful room. It was the only room that had a telephone in it because all the rest didn't. So I'm like, I'm taking that because I got to be able to call home, that sort of thing. And so I took this real nice, it was like a baby blue with like velvet curtains that were probably, it's what seemed to me to be like 25 feet in the air. They were so big, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful room. And so I took this room and I felt comfortable in it. So I was there. My boss took the one across the hall, and it wasn't as lavish, but still nice. So she said, I'll be over here. You guys stay there. I said, okay. Halfway through the night, I'm talking to Anthony. Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking to another friend of mine, and I thought that all of a sudden that I thought I better call home and find out what's happening. So I called home, and I decided to see how my little girl was doing and so forth. And Todd said, we're just sitting here and we're having a good time, and and explaining what was going on throughout the day and for her at school and so forth. And Todd, would you like to tell what happened to you guys?
And while I was talking to her, we were sitting on the floor. I was cross-legged, and Amy's daughter was sitting across from me. And I had previously gotten a glass of water, and I had finished it, and I had put it on this little dresser drawer next to the bed, and without anyone being near it or anything, I literally saw this glass move from the center of this dresser table, the top of this dresser table. It moved by itself off the table, through the air, and landed on the ground next to me. And no one had touched this glass. It was.
And I remember saying, "Oh my word!" He basically said, "Hey, that just went across the table." And I'm like, "What? What's happening? What's happening?" And he's like, "No, there was a glass of wine I just had here, and a glass of water, and it just flew off the table." And I didn't think anything of that at the time, because stuff like that happened to us all the time. I'm like, well, we kind of laughed it off and didn't say much. But then, after I got done talking to him, and I said goodnight and everything, and I hung up the phone, and I get a knock on my door. And my boss is panicking, and she is screaming practically, open the door, open the door. And she said, I am not staying in that room. And I said to her, what? Why? What's wrong? She said, there's a man in my room. And I said, what? She said, I can see through him, but he's in my room. I can see what he's wearing. And I just can't stay there. She said, he has riding boots on. And I'm like, what? Okay. And she's like, I need to stay in your room. So I'm like, all right. So she comes in my room. We had one big double bed. So I said, go ahead. You can have this side. I'll take this side. And she's telling the story over and over again. And I said, really? Are you sure that's what you saw? And then I started telling her about my experience with my family at home and how something weird had happened there. And then all of a sudden she says, oh, gosh, let's hope nothing happens in here. I'm like, oh, I don't think so. So we decided to go to sleep after talking for about an hour or so about everything, and we think we have to get up in the morning early, so we didn't want to stay up any longer. And we're both laying down. I kind of moved the covers up over my face because I at that point my heart's beating about a mile a minute, thinking I'm going to see something at any moment. Sure enough, she looks over first and she sees a woman at this like vanity that was in the room brushing her hair. And she's like, "Do you see her, Jill?" And I thought, "Oh gosh." And what will happen then is she will see, she saw the, what do you call it? I didn't see it at all. And then all of a sudden, whenever she said, "Did you see it?" I picked up my blanket and pulled it down a little bit. And I looked and I thought, "Oh, you got to be kidding me. I saw it too." So it scared the daylights out of both of us. And we hardly got any sleep that night. And when we woke up in the morning, we went downstairs and we asked the people who owned it. We said to them, "How come you didn't tell us that this place is haunted?" And the lady who owned it said, "Why? What'd you see?" And we were like, "Well, we saw a man and a woman, and we're explaining everything that we saw." And it was just so creepy. And the woman says, "Yeah," she says, "Well, the story goes that there was a bride that was getting married, and her husband was coming in on a barge of a logging ship. And when he got to the place, he went to jump off to greet her, and he fell between and got smashed by the boat and the ship. And at that point, she was so upset when he passed, she went and I guess committed suicide in that home. That's where she was. And they've haunted it ever since." So I was like, wow, that was crazy because we did.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are two possibilities here. The first is that what occurred in your home and what occurred at this hotel are unrelated, and it was purely coincidence that you both happened to occur at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Or that this was a coordinated event, that it was the same intelligence operating at the same time in two different locations, and that what you saw was not necessarily the literal ghosts of these two people, but was more this strange non-human thing kind of playing on that legend, kind of using that for its own costuming, taking that form. Tom could explain this more articulately than I could.
So like obviously I think I just want to start with a note that the woman in white or the bridal ghost is definitely an archetype, and so that's definitely something which is quite commonly seen. And so if we are to interpret that these ghosts, or at least some of them, are actually manifestations of a non-human intelligence basically playing a character, then we can almost see evidence for that in how common women in white are. Yes. And so it's almost as if that's a stock character which it uses. But so people such as John Keel, who's a researcher from the 60s, speculated that that the paranormal is the result of a manifestation of these non-human intelligences, which are effectively tricksters. So they masquerade as other things. So he explained UFOs and ghosts and all of these things as these masks put on by this one phenomena. And I think that there's a lot of cases in which these things are very much interlinked. So there's a case I know in which a UFO, which I believe was described as like a large white diamond-shaped object, lands in a field, and then a transparent humanoid wearing monk's clothing emerges from it. And so it's like these things are all very much tangled up together, and it does seem like there's some kind of interconnectability with them.
Yeah. So in other words, like they would actually be playing the characters of the ghosts and things of the stories that happen, and still infiltrating my life, basically, perhaps.
Effectively,
Yeah,
perhaps,
that
according to
makes
this
sense.
sort of theory, yes.
And why it is doing that, why it would want to, we have no idea.
It's funny you say that about the women in white, because the next story is something with the same kind of story as well, too.
Okay,
It's
go on.
another woman in white, happening in the Gettysburg area.
Ah,
And that was more recent with us too. And you want me to go ahead and tell that story so that
Yeah.
we talk about that one? But what had happened there was, both my husband and his friend decided that they would like to get into the Civil War reenacting. And so my family, we all started doing it, and it was a lot of fun. And we did a lot of it in Gettysburg and different areas, and we'd spend a lot of time out there. And one night we were over at Sprangler's?
Spranglers Spring.
Yeah, Sprangler Spring, where the typical story of the woman in white, and that, something that happened to the bride. Same thing. She was supposed to marry one of the soldiers there, and she ended up losing him. Same thing. So she hung herself in that area, and her ghost is known to be seen, etc. So we were laughing and joking about it, basically, and saying that, what if we see her tonight? Oh, that'd be really frightening. So the friend that was with us, they were both in their gear, and they were dressed in the military old style Civil War gear, and they were like sitting on a rock, and they're kind of smoking
The
cigarettes, and I think pipes you had then. And we're all talking, and he said, I have an infrared camera. He said, here, go ahead and look through it and see if you can see anything. So I'm like, okay. So I'm taking this thing, and I'm going around with the infrared, because you can't really see at night, but you could through that. So I'm like, putting it on them, and then I would look away, and I'd put it on them again, just to see. And I thought I was filming at that time, but and I thought, oh, this is kind of neat. Sure enough, the next time I put it up, there is a woman standing off in the background with a white dress on, and she was right behind him. And I remember saying, like, when I would look away and look with my eyes, I couldn't see it, but with the infrared, I could. And I even made my family member come over and say, hey, can you see this? Look, do you see that woman that's behind them? And because I even told them, be quiet, there's someone behind us, and I didn't realize at that time that she really wasn't one of us. I thought at that time she was just a woman that was up there, but then when I would take the infrared camera away, she wasn't there. So I was all really excited, thinking I had got something on tape. And then whenever I asked the friend, I said, oh, you know what, I think I got that on tape. And he's like, no, you didn't. He said, because that tape's empty. I was like, oh, for crying out loud. So we missed it totally. But, that was another thing that we saw with that same scenario, which I find really odd that you say that.
It's interesting how you mentioned, you were anticipating seeing it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You were, in fact, joking about seeing it, and then you saw it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that necessarily had any connection to you seeing it. But it might, kind of a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come dynamic. I don't know.
Yeah. Perhaps I invited it,
Tom, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking about the infrared camera thing, and and obviously back to Keel. There's Keel's speculation about entities existing within a different section of the electromagnetic spectrum, the super spectrum, as he called it. But also there are a few urban legends I know about of like early tests of like infrared technology catching entities on like soldiers infrared cameras, for example. And so I yeah, that's the main thing which I thought of when hearing that story, is that the infrared element is very interesting. I mean, it's sure, it's a cliche, but perhaps it's a cliche for a reason.
Yeah, and the super spectrum was his term for those bands of the electromagnetic spectrum that are invisible to the human eye, those that are outside of visible light, which would include infrared, but also ultraviolet. And then everything beyond that, because physicists are saying, oh, well, yeah, visible light is only 1% of the EM spectrum, but invisible light is also only like 1%. You know, there's so much beyond that, so much Z beyond zebra. So he kind of just condensed all that into one abstraction, the super spectrum.
Yeah, that to me is very fascinating. Just listening to his Tom, your reasoning behind some of these things, it's like really surprising me, but at the same time, I'm actually like, that is very interesting. Like I'm actually going to write that down and go look at that kind of stuff after this is done too.
Yeah, I certainly recommend the works of John Keel, and
yeah.
Also,
Okay.
Jacques Vallée, so JACQUES VALLEE. He talks about UFOs in the context of like folklore and kind of almost as more paranormal manifestations than actually extraterrestrial.
Okay. Can you spell that for me one more time, please? I missed it.
Wait, now I've lost it. Damn it. Michael, can you help?
It's just Jacques, as in Jacques Cousteau, JACQUES, and then Valet, VALLEE.
Okay.
And it's worth noting also that, as Tom said, like war fields, battlefields are hotbeds of this, more so than other locations. Todd has told me you've been to Gettysburg in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I know a lot of people have claimed to have experienced things there. Timothy Renner has claimed some pretty intense experiences there. Once again, I don't know why that is. It just seems to be the case.
Sorry.
Go on, Tom.
People talk about it as being like to do with the intense emotion and the violence and the kind of the kind of sheer intensity of that sort of event taking place in the past, which kind of almost draws things to that area. Again, I'm not sure how correct that would be, because obviously we have no idea of the mechanism of these things in general, so we've got no idea whether or not emotions and like past conflicts actually play a role. But looking at the data of this sort of thing, it seems likely.
Yeah, I've read like speculative science articles where they actually give some validity to these beliefs, that that perhaps emotions do carry an energy that can have minute physical effects in the environment, and that may tie into this. We do know that burning sage does have a scientifically measurable effect on the environment. And we do know that in turn does impact one's mood, one's emotions. So it's an infant science. It's not something we know too much about, but it's not to be dismissed either. What else has happened?
Oh my, let me think. More so now, just recently, it's been I've been able to, like I said, like I said, when reading people's poems, and also the idea of talking to people who have passed, that has really occurred to me a lot too. Just recently, I had come in contact with let's see, how do I want to say this? I've come in contact with a few families that have lost a dear friend through he was a police officer. And I ended up getting to know these people, and he passed 2 years ago. And there is some of that happened to me where I was able to, it was a medium who came to me, of all people, which I was online. So you really think right there it's hokey, you know what I mean? But this medium that came to me online, she started out saying to me, I need to talk to you. And I thought, what in the world? And she said, first of all, your sister wants to talk to you. Well, I lost my sister about 10 years ago. And we weren't talking at that time due to religious conflicts. And she basically told me something that nobody would ever be able to tell me about my sister. So I knew something was up. I thought, that's really strange. She was able to say something to me that no one normally would be able to say. So that really blew my mind. And then the very next thing she said is, I have a lot of police officers that want to talk to you. And I thought, what? Why? Why me? You know? And one of the things that I was able to do for this family was I was on the jury for his murder. And we were able to bring the person to justice that had murdered him. So I can see why all these past police officers would want to contact me because of it. And she came right out and said to me, and now mind you, I did not really know this family, nor do I know anything about them, or never had read anything, because when you're on a trial, you're not supposed to be able to, know anything about the story, So I didn't. I really had not heard anything about it until it happened, and I heard it through the district attorney and his story, and also the defense. So after the fact, this woman that came to me online, she said, do you know a Michael? Do you know a Paul? Do you know a Brian? And I said, no, I do know Brian, but is he passed or not? And they said, yes, he is. And then I went online a little bit later after I'd talked to her, because I had no idea what she was talking about. These people, they were going on and on, like to get a message to their mothers and blah, blah, blah. Here, when I went online, I was able to look up, something online, and I found all three of those names associated with that family that I was just with. How funny, how creepy is that? But it was really amazing, at the same time. So, she's been wanting to meet with me, but I'm half afraid to talk to her. So I don't know.
Now, to backtrack somewhat, the poltergeist phenomena you experienced early in your relationship with Todd, how long did that go on? When did that end?
It's when we moved out of that first apartment. We weren't bothered by that for a long time.
Okay.
No, it stopped after we moved. It was the entire duration that we lived in that apartment. We had strange things like that happen.
Yes, constantly. But then when we moved to the next house, nothing like that went on for years and years and years. And then we moved and we bought our own home. And like I said, nothing of the ghost type thing has happened in this new home. But like I said, I have been able to, come in contact with a lot of, like mediums and stuff like that, sending me messages from other people that I happen to know. How weird is that?
Well, another thing that did happen at that apartment we lived in is I remember one day when Amy went to work, I was home, and I got on the computer, and I like behind me, I almost felt like a presence behind me, like I wasn't alone, but I was alone in the house, and I suddenly I saw this shadow move over my left shoulder, and I saw the computer's on-off button depress. The computer was shut off. That was another strange thing that happened to me.
A shadow? Did you see its shape, its form?
It was almost like there was someone standing behind me, and if they were like reaching over my shoulder, that's what it looked like.
Okay, and no distinct features?
No.
Okay, see, obviously, like, shadow people are a popular subgenre of this phenomena. They've been, there's actually not much to be said about them other than that they're out there. You know what I mean? Mainly what I'm Although it's interesting. It's interesting that it actually, pressed a button on your computer. I've never heard of one doing that. It seems like such a pointless act.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's just one of the strange things that happened to me when I was living in that house.
We know these things like to troll you. We know they like to annoy you and disrupt your life, but that doesn't even do that. That just kind of. Maybe it was curious.
It's just
maybe it would for Todd though. He likes the computer a lot.
Yeah.
The thing I was wondering.
Sorry.
Is I'm trying to think. Okay, is this phenomena? Is it in this case? Is it connected to the location, or is it connected to them? Because if it was, you say that it ended when you left that apartment, that would imply the location.
Yeah, and like I said, the apartment was right next to it. There was within viewing distance of our. If you looked out the back windows of the house, you saw a funeral home that was right there.
But the thing is, it happened within the context of the life of someone who's been marked by this, who's had this going on for strange experiences going on for years before. So it could be a bit of both. It could be that this intelligence, supposing it is a single intelligence, kind of orchestrates things and guides things into happening like this. Like orchestrated your move to that location, knowing that activity was there, that it occurred there. Perhaps it's a bit of both. Tom, what are your thoughts?
So, my take on whether or not it's like you focused or location focused, I would again say that it's a bit of both, but in a slightly different way. Mm-hmm. So I would say that because your life has been so marked by these sorts of odd occurrences, and it's quite clear that you as people are both much more kind of I use the term weirdness magnet, but that's not exactly a scientific term, but it's because you two you two are both weirdness magnets seemingly, and so if you move into a house where there is some kind of intelligence or some kind of something, then it's obviously much more likely that it will interact with you, and that you will in effect trigger it, set it off. Yeah. And so I think that again it's a mix of both. I'd say that it because that specific poltergeist phenomena ceased when you left the house. That implies that it was something which was local to the house, but again, in the context of the wider life involving all this weirdness, that's what I'd interpret it as, at least.
Oh, it could be that it's a false dichotomy altogether. Perhaps, if the phenomena is you focused and location focused at the same time, perhaps it becomes location focused because it is you focused. You know what I'm saying? Perhaps if it's already you focused, then it guides you, whether you realize it or not, to places where it has those maybe infestations is the best way to describe it, or it has those presences. So perhaps you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But let's backtrack further and describe your experiences as an RH negative. I know one thing that they commonly describe is electrical interference with things like streetlights, clocks, magnets, etc.
Mm-hmm. I haven't had any of that type of thing. There are a few of them that I can say that I have experienced because I've read a little bit about it. But my temperature is constantly very, very low. Anywhere from 95.6 to 97 being probably the highest. And that's one of the things that they say is very common is the colder blood, I guess, that they have. And it's so strange with the COVID thing because if I was sick, people probably wouldn't even know it. You know what I mean? Because a 98.6 would be something that people might want to worry about me with, So that's one of the things. But the intuitiveness and the psychic ability, things of that sort. I've always been in tune with that type, and they say that that's probably one of them too. Maybe an empath, I would even say,
Okay.
able to have those things. As far as name some of the other things, if you know, please.
Anatomical peculiarities. For instance, elf ears, pointed inner ears, making it hard to use earbuds.
Mm.
Missing vertebrae.
Yeah. Missing
What's it called?
vertebrae.
Greek
I have in my.
toe,
Mm-hmm.
where the toe next to your big toe is longer than your big toe for some reason.
Yes, I have that as well.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the elf ears. I'm jealous of people who have them. I think they're cool. But no, I don't have those.
I do have elf ears. It's not.
That's awesome.
I can't use earplugs. I can't use earbuds. I can't.
So you are also RH negative, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any of the things affect you like that? Just out of curiosity. Here I am turning it around on you. I'm just curious.
Oh God, the spotlight hits me. I'm sweating. Hypersensitivity to sound.
Yeah.
Almost like a dog frightened by the sound of fireworks outside, lightning, things like that.
That's interesting.
I don't know. I'm, but I do have a lot of the anatomical characteristics, which, again, the best we can tell is there was a population centuries ago, all of whom had all of those characteristics consistently. But as they dispersed and they intermarried and interbred with others, those genes were diluted. Some of them were lost. So now their descendants, centuries later, well, sometimes they have some of them. Sometimes they have a few of them. Very few people have all of them consistently. A lot
of my particular, ethnic background. I'm actually Latvian, Hungary, like the Hungary area, and French, and Czechoslovakian.
Now that's interesting because Rh negative is actually not common in those populations. It's statistically, it is the most common in the Basque Country, in Spain and France, and in quote unquote Celtic regions of Britain and Ireland.
Ireland, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. It's not a majority anywhere. But it is a large plurality in those cases. But in the areas you're describing in Central and Eastern Europe, it's not common there at all. So that's interesting. Let me ask you this: these things are usually generational.
Yes.
Meaning, whatever it is, it attaches itself to families. We don't know why. We don't know based on what criteria or how it's able to form those attachments. But there's a good chance that if you've had strange experiences, then your parents and your grandparents have as well, and your children have as well. Do you know of your any parents and relatives, those older than you, that have experienced things?
Anything like that? No, I don't actually. That's the strange thing. No, I really don't. But another one for another time is like I don't have a whole lot of contact with my family because of religious reasons.
Okay.
They've shunned me. So I've been shunned for probably about 30 years now. So I have not been able to have that kind of contact with them to ask those things.
Well, I apologize for having brought it up.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a religious cult that I was raised in for a long, long time. So it's okay.
And has your daughter, now an adult, experienced anything?
Not that I'm aware of, but we've had such strange things happen to us all along that it's probably, to us, we think of it as normal. You know what I'm saying? So it's hard to just out of the blue think of something that may have happened to her other than the stories that I've said. She's witnessed most of it and all of it all her life. And like I said, she has seen a lot of the things that we've done. So it's hard for me to say that other than that, I don't know what if anything else she's ever had that way.
Hasn't you don't know if she's made a solo album yet?
No. No.
Now let me ask, if we were to backtrack again to this apartment. We kind of went over it earlier, but only in an abstract way, in a general way. I'd like to, if memory permits, go over some of the specific experiences other than the two you've already discussed.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I'm asking you.
Oh, you're asking me if I have anything else to add to it?
Specific memories from that apartment, yes.
Oh, from that apartment. Trying to think if there's anything that stands out to me. Oh, that one of the things that always stood out to me is it was not only just my daughter that wouldn't stay in her room, but when we had guests from out of town who had never, even been to our house before,
or heard the stories,
wouldn't sleep up there either. In fact, they slept up to the first night, but then the second night they asked if they could please sleep somewhere else. So we never did realize why they didn't want to sleep up there or anything. They just didn't want to. So they slept in the living room the rest of the week that they were there.
Yeah. And again, that's common because it does seem that in location, in for lack of a better term, haunted locations, the phenomena is always the strongest, always the most heavily concentrated in specific rooms or in specific floors of the house. Like in the house my father grew up in, it was the second floor, specifically his older brother's bedroom, where it was the most intense. In the house I grew up in, second floor, my bedroom specifically, and the back of the basement, but not the front of the basement. And I don't know why it's so specific. You'd think being so specific within such a small location that's like splitting hairs.
Yeah. But
I don't know. Perhaps
I would say, in that apartment, it would have been the second floor. It actually would have been the third floor for us because it was an attic space. We lived on the second floor, so it would have been the second floor to our apartment, but actually on the whole building, it would have been the third floor. But it's kind of strange. You keep saying second floor. I was just thinking, oh, that's weird.
One theory is that certain events occur in those rooms or in those parts of the house that kind of open it up, that kind of create charge the energy in the room in a way, in the location in a way that enables these intelligences to come through, to attach themselves to it. Whereas, for instance, traumatic events. Whereas if a traumatic event occurs in like the back of the basement will bear that scar, there will be attachments there. But if it didn't happen in the living room, well, then the living room will be relatively clean. Even though they're in the same house. Tom, what's your take?
Well, I'm just right now. I'm just thinking of other stories in which specific rooms in houses are inhabited by things. There was a case from I want to say Vancouver, but I know that it's not in Vancouver. But just off the top of my head, I'll just say, if I say it's somewhere in North America or Canada, that's not helpful. So there's this specific case in which a family goes out to a holiday home on a kind of cliff top coastal region, and their dog refuses to enter this specific kind of little back pantry area. And like nobody wants to go in that room, and eventually the daughter starts talking about the daughter of this family starts talking about quote little men who live in that room, and gradually this weirdness escalates, and the family is forced to, and eventually it leaks out of this room, and the family is forced to flee. And there's another case from Martin Street in Detroit, which is in which a hag-like entity lived in, as I say, the back bedroom. and something from both of these two cases is that it's often I've just now realized that it's often in the back of the house, which is weird. And so yeah, I think that Michael's assessment of it being associated with like trauma that's taken place in those specific rooms is probably the best we can do, unless we say that, oh, actually, no, sorry, you can kind of hear my brain working as I'm talking. But the not Patrick Harper, Paul Devereaux, in his book Spirit Roads, talked about several ancient cases of the fairies, in which like these fairy roads would so in which like buildings would be built on top of these fairy roads, and so the fairy road would just bisect a specific room in that building, and then that room specifically would become haunted by poltergeist-like activity. And so if we're referring to these fairy roads as like equivalent to kind of the modern ley line mythology and all of that, so it's like perhaps the specific rooms which become haunted are crossed by these lines of activity, if you like. What do you think? Sorry.
No, that very well could have happened. You know, we only lived there for about 3 or 4 years, but I'm sure that house has been around for a long, long time. So who knows what would have happened, because we just moved into that area in that house. So it wasn't like, you know, we were from that particular area at all. So I would not have known if anything had happened that was traumatic, and it very well could have.
I just had an observation. Todd, you encountered a shadow person in there.
Mm-hmm. That's what it seemed like, yeah.
And this was also in close proximity to a funeral home.
Yes.
And so we can kind of look at an intersection between ghosts and shadow people. Now, I'm not saying that they are equivalent, that shadow people are human ghosts, or that humans become shadow people after they die. But supposing they are two separate phenomena, it is interesting to see them all kind of, you know, clustering together around the same location.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to see those clusters. And it's interesting to see a shadow person in relation to poltergeist activity. Because usually we don't see poltergeists. We see their effects. We see the outcomes of their behavior, definitely. We have to clean up after them. But we don't see them, what they look like, if indeed they look like anything. So perhaps a poltergeist, if seen visually, is a shadow person or resembles a shadow person. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
In the Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro case, which is a poltergeist case from Madrid in the late 90s, I seem to remember that while the house was being torn up by some invisible force, there was a like the family members were panicking. The family ended up all staying in one upstairs bedroom because there was a shadow person or a shadow man, as they described it, in the hall just outside. And so they found it very difficult to leave, obviously, because there was this thing outside. And so there are definitely cases in which shadow people and poltergeist activity kind of cross over.
It's funny you should say that, because for years in that home, we all slept in one room.
Yep.
we did.
Yeah, not all the years, but
not all of them, but
most
a good portion of them. We saw. My daughter would sleep on a sleeping bag down below our feet. She was too scared.
It also reminds me of this is a story from Timothy Beckley, where a family, I don't remember when, I don't remember where, living, I think, out on the outskirts of a small town, not in a neighborhood. They didn't have neighbors, and they had one night they saw a bright light in the sky kind of come down, and then in their backyard, and then disappear. And then a little while later, they saw a shadow person walking through their living room, or somewhere on their first floor. And then from then on, that began a prolonged period of poltergeist activity in the house.
Mm.
So again, it's the connection of a black figure and poltergeist activity, like
And
Todd
obviously a UFO.
experienced. Yes.
Yeah, that's very
Now,
strange. Mm.
Todd, what have you had any experiences prior to meeting her or independent of meeting her?
No, that was I've never had any experiences except with Amy. Uh, she actually warned me that she seemed to attract certain things like that before I when I first met her. But no, I've for me on my own, I've never experienced anything.
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Sorry, honey.
Oh, do you have anything else you'd like to share from any time in your life? Any other stories you can think of? Or?
That's most of the stories that I can remember that I've had. And like I said, it's been crazy, and it's very interesting to hear your takes on it too, because it kind of helps me understand a little bit about some of the things that have happened to me and why. It's very strange to listen to hear that other people have had these experiences, because I for one do not read a whole lot, to be honest with you. So
Okay.
to hear you say these things, and it's like, what, someone else thought that too, or they had that experience, or they've seen, the same type of thing that I had. That's mind-blowing to me, and now
Well,
you want to go read it.
you told me that at some point in your life you were reading extensively about these things.
Hmm.
What?
Well, yes, I'm not a heavy reader as far as like going out and just buying them, but I will read when I find something of interest. And to me, I would read. I like, or I prefer to read a lot of more articles online than I would an actual book. So, but like, if it really, really interests me, I will pick up a book and read it. But as far as, like looking at different things like this, I've never really researched it until it happened to me. You know what
Okay.
I'm saying? Yeah.
What literature did you read on the subject?
Oh, oh my. I can't even remember. It was so long ago when I first started looking at things. Um, Mostly online stuff really didn't occur to me, and I didn't really have a computer until the 2000s. I was kind of late on that boat. Started in like 1986, but I think 2000 is when I actually got a computer and started looking up things that I could. Most of it was like that, but I just remember pulling out uh, even library books at that time and seeing anything I could find on, UFOs or ghosts and entities. I don't remember anything in particular by any particular author, though,
Okay.
at this time. No.
Because this would have been in like the 90s.
Yes.
Okay, so you were most likely reading like like stock literature, as we discussed before.
Yeah.
Jacobs, Mack, Hopkins, Strieber.
Yeah. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think Carla Turner would probably ever ended up at a public library. That's a little too fringe.
No,
Um,
that name didn't sound familiar.
yeah, so you live in Chestnut Ridge.
It's a hot spot out here.
Yeah, what goes on in Chestnut Ridge that you know of? That you
Oh, mainly the big thing out here is UFO conventions and
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot conventions. We have a lot of that.
We don't live. We live pretty close to the. It's
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of Kecksburg in this area in Pennsylvania,
Yep.
but we're very close to Kecksburg. We can get there in probably about a half hour, maybe.
it's
Yeah.
less than that
Yeah.
probably.
But you say there's conventions for those things, but what
Oh yeah.
if it's a hot spot, what's going on that causes the conventions?
Oh, people calling in sightings constantly. In fact,
Okay.
we even have a person out here by the name of Stan Gordon who
Yeah.
has studied them all his life, and he basically does a lot of the lecturing when we're at those kind of conventions. And I've gone to a few of them, and they're fascinating, really fascinating. And we have a lot of people that actually from the area of Kecksburg that'll tell you that stuff didn't even really happen.
Yeah.
So it's hard to believe, one way or the other. Like I said, we do have some friends that, her grandfather owns that farm that it landed on. And She even said that her grandfather will swear up and down nothing ever happened like that. So who knows what the real truth is, whenever they had the army in there and everything. So who knows what happened that night. It is pretty fascinating to hear about and see everything. And I like going to them because you can actually see all the sightings and stuff. They keep they take plaster molds and they see you can see the big feet that they find.
For Bigfoot.
Yeah, some of them are like 2-3 feet across. They're huge.
And that's interesting because, there is, or at least there appears to be a link between Bigfoot and UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Bigfoot, upon close inspection, does not appear to be an undiscovered hominid, just as UFOs on close inspection do not appear to be extraterrestrial craft.
Mm-hmm.
But they do appear to be manifestations of the same phenomena, hence the geographic overlap that you're describing. It is, Tom, you could articulate this better than I could.
So, for example, there's a case from the 70s, right up I believe it is actually up there on Chestnut Ridge, of a farmer who saw a large orange round object land in one of his fields, and when he went out to investigate it with his son, I believe it was, he encountered two large hairy humans moving alongside a fence. Coming up, and I believe they were coming up towards the object, and there are stories of Bigfoot being accompanied by weird orb-like lights in the forest. There are plenty of stories of like actual UFO landings being associated with Bigfoot entities, a lot of which come from Pennsylvania. You've got there's actually a book published by Joshua Cutchin written by Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner called Where the Footprints End, which is all about the kind of Bigfoot as not an undiscovered primate and as something instead far stranger, associated with UFOs and ghosts, even associated with all this kind of melting pot of strangeness. And so I definitely think that there is a strong connection between UFOs and Bigfoot, but I think that neither of them are what they appear to be.
And it's not a new connection either. One thing that we like to focus on is the similarity of contemporary UFOnauts to older things like fairies and the Fae folk. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of, laugh if you want when you hear the term fairy, but there are very obvious parallels. Just as Bigfoot is very redolent of, older folk tales of wild hairy men who live in the woods, the Woodwazay in France, the Bogart in Britain, etc., which were described at times as a type of Fae, as a subclass of Fae. The wild man, the wild hairy man, or whatever, is actually a very common archetype, a universal. So I'd say the connection is pretty well established.
Yeah, and then of course it goes without mentioning that like fairy folklore was associated with like lights in the sky and small humanoids and all the trimmings that come with modern UFO lore. And so it's like if Bigfoot is associated with fairy lore and fairy lore is associated with UFO lore, then we got another connection there between Bigfoot and UFOs. And it's S.D. Tucker wrote a book called The Hidden Folk, which covers the links between fairies and all sorts of modern paranormal phenomena, such as poltergeists, ranging from poltergeists to Bigfoot. He actually he wrote a sequel last year, I think it was, and So again, I keep spewing out book recommendations, so apologies for that.
No, that's okay. I'm taking them down. So
none of these are sales pitches, by the way. He's not being paid.
Yeah.
This isn't product placement.
Yep, not sponsored.
It's interesting. It's interesting. You live in this Bigfoot hotspot, and you've experienced poltergeist activity, there has also been uncovered a link between, or not a link between them, but a parallel between Bigfoot and poltergeist behavior.
No, interesting.
Oh, that is interesting.
Many of the same obnoxious behaviors, rattling doors, rattling windows,
Throwing rocks,
vandalism, yes. Things like that are exhibited in both. Again, Tom is so much better at explaining this than I am.
So okay, so in like all these, just to take kind of very modern, like kind of pop cultural example, you know, all these TV shows like Finding Bigfoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. So so something which they'll often do in that is wood knocking. So where they'll knock on wood in hope of getting a response from these creatures which they assume are undiscovered primates. Now in Victorian spiritualist seances, they would obviously, poltergeists or spirits would communicate by knocking, and so you have this connection between the Bigfoot behavior and poltergeist behavior in the knocking. You have there's hundreds upon hundreds of poltergeist cases of where stones are thrown, and stones come even just down from the ceiling like rain, and and then of course you have loads of a kind of cliche Bigfoot behavior is basically just hurling rocks at people, and you have like strange sounds and voice mimicry, and like the kind of crying baby noise which a Bigfoot will apparently often make, and you have these same noises showing up in poltergeist cases, and even in like, okay, so to take another really famous example, the Bell Witch haunting. There's a moment from that long and drawn out saga in which an investigator basically asks the entity to reveal itself, at which point the investigator feels what he described as a hairy hand grab onto his, and so, and again, the English boggart or bogart is a species of house fairy, basically, which would throw things around and generally cause a poltergeist-like nuisance. And how is the boggart described? Well, in one of the many descriptions of the boggart, it is a tall, hairy man. So, yeah, and so it's almost like, I remember in the early days of our research group, I came up with the little thing, which is basically just that a poltergeist is just like Bigfoot is just an outdoor poltergeist but visible, basically. And it's like their behavior almost maps almost exactly onto each other, which is really interesting.
And I was wondering, I mean, living where you do, you have to know people. You have to know people in your neighborhood and your community who are into this thing, if only on a casual level, who go out into the woods with cameras.
Oh, yes.
Recording technology.
Yes, we know quite a few people that do that, and they actually hold, you can actually go with them and go looking. You know, they'll get a sighting that says that there's something in this county, and if you know them or whatnot, they'll invite you to actually go to those things. We've been invited to a few of them, but never had the opportunity to go to one. And I think it would be fantastic to do so.
Yeah. The guy to look at is I believe he has his own podcast, and he knows if you look him up, his name is usually paired with like Timothy Renner, but is Eric Altman. And he's considered a Bigfoot hunter here, and also an associate of Stan Gordon.
Okay. And I assume these people have stories they've told you.
Yes, they have. However, they're kind of secretive with a lot of them because it's their story to tell. You know what I mean? So, like, I think he would probably even, you know, if you might even want to, you could probably get a hold of him. I could probably try to get a hold of him to see if he would do an interview with you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
that'd be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, so if I can, I'll see if I can do that for you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
And unless Tom has anything to say, I think we're I think we're tapped out here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Well, I just want to
Sorry.
thank you guys. I just want to thank you guys for having us on.
Yes, thank you.
It's no problem. We'd thank you more than you'd thank us.
Certainly. It's been great.
Yeah, and I'll let Tom take us out here.
Okay.
Okay. Wow. The spotlight is on me again. Just like, are you sure this was a good idea? Yes. So, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really fascinating to hear to hear from a weirdness magnet like yourselves.
Mm.
And so yes, thank you. Obviously, because we won't give out any so where can people find you? No, we're not going to do that.
Appreciate it.
So yes, but anywho, thank you for listening, listeners, and we will see you next week. I guess is that how you do it, Michael?
Yes, that's how I do it.
Splendid.
All right.
Excellent.
Take it easy.
Thank you. So long.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.